Hi, I'm Mike, owner of the In-Groove in Phoenix, Arizona. Today I'm going to do a review and comparison video. I know it's been a while since I've done one of these, but this is going to be a fun one just because this is one of my favorite albums of all time. Pink Floyd's Animals. Now, I was looking forward to doing this video. I had planned it for a long period of time. I got going with it. I started listening to this record, and when you listen to a record analytically and you're looking for differences versus listening to something for pleasure, sometimes that's to your own detriment. In the case of this record, that's kind of what happened. When you compare Animals to Pink Floyd's later and earlier output, The Wall, Wish You Were Here, Dark Side of the Moon, this is not a particularly spectacular sounding record. It is kind of a muddy record overall. For whatever reason, the sound quality, the recording was not as good as those other albums mentioned. And it's noticeable. And it also makes it difficult differentiating between one or the other because they're not that good sounding, especially compared to albums like Steely Dan's Asia. There's certain albums, Dark Side of the Moon, that almost every copy sounds good, and then you're struggling to find a benefit from one copy versus the other. This is the opposite. This is an album, when you get down to it, it's like, man, this is a drawback, but this is better. I kind of, in a way, wish I can combine three of these albums, mastering-wise, and make the perfect copy, because they all have their strong suits. One of the things that this particular copy does well is it's really quiet. This is an album that has a lot of quiet parts, and it's pretty hard to listen to certain pressings of this because they're so noisy. One of the things I looked for the most on all these listens was the beginning of Sheep. Sheep is very quiet. It's towards the back half of the flip side, so it's more prone to inner groove distortion and noise in general. This particular copy did really, really well with taming that noise. I will say it is, like a lot of Japanese pressings, almost all Japanese pressings, really goosed up in the upper end. The treble, the upper end frequencies, it lends to the feeling of you're getting better instrument definition. You know, you get that illusion, you get that feeling that the instruments are better separated, but it's not a very comfortable listen to. It's not balanced at all. Most pressings of this guitar, this particular record, accentuate the mid-range. Really focus on that mid-range sound, the guitars, the vocals. This particular pressing accentuates the upper end. And that was really hard for me to grapple with. Like most Japanese records, really well done. You got the obi, the cover, the sound, quality of the vinyl, really, really good. I don't really care for the sound of this. And it's one of my least favorite copies of this record. All right, next. So I'm actually going to show you this one next. This is actually a US first pressing. The US first pressing, and I've gone through, I cannot tell you how many copies of this at the store. I've not found a quiet one. I mean, this is a noisy record. You're dealing with the late 70s, oil crisis, US vinyl. I mean, it is low quality vinyl. It is noisy. Maybe somebody out there has a quiet copy, but of the 50 copies of this I put on the turntable in the past couple of years, I've not really found a low noise version of this. I will say this is very balanced. The US is very balanced. It's not too trebly, it's not too bassy, it's really focused in on the middle. It's got a pretty decent soundstage, but as a whole, I'm not a real big fan of this. I don't foresee myself ever listening to a US first pressing. It's kind of on the bottom end tier of stuff. All right, here was actually a pleasant surprise. I don't find myself liking Canadian pressings too much, but this was better than the US copies that I've listened to. The vinyl was significantly more quiet, had kind of the same presentation as the US first pressing, but on quieter vinyl. I found the Canadian copies are easier to obtain quieter vinyl. So you can kind of tell the difference. It says made in Canada, but it also has the red Columbia logo on it there. But overall, this is a copy I could see myself putting on the turntable. I would be happy with this, maybe if I didn't know better and I didn't have other copies of it. But this is a pretty solid overall sounding copy. Not bad. So now Let's check this out. This is a Greek first pressing. This actually has, to me, a very similar sound to the UK first pressing. UK first pressing has a little better bass definition. It's a little almost hotter cut, but it's not. But it has a much better lower end. Pretty good noise-wise, not really a noisy record. I don't know how easy it's going to be to find Greek pressings in general. Why I have this, I don't even know. It kind of stumbled into the store once upon a time. But I'm actually happy with this. This is so far what I've showed you guys. This is a better overall sounding copy. You'll notice there's certain copies I haven't talked about yet because they're the better sounding. We're going to leave that for the end. UK pressing. The UK pressing, this is more like it. But let's get on in the video. So out of all the US pressings I've listened to, I like this one the best. This is not even the album per se. This is a radio DJ promo. Let me show you this. This was specially made for DJs. The title, the tracks are banded specifically for radio play. So the album does not flow like the traditional record does. There's some censorship on some of the tracks where they've cut out some of the obscenities, but this is significantly quieter than the US first pressing. And I feel that this has a little bit lower end thump. Not something I would seek out because this is extremely expensive as a US promo only. But out of the US copies, this is by far and away the best sounding of those. So yeah, I wasn't even originally going to show this in the video. And then I thought to myself, you know, this US copy is so atrocious. And for years, people have said the US copy is good. The US copy is good. It's really not. But then I thought to myself, I wonder if the promo, you know, a lot of times promo copies sound better. I wonder if this sounds better. And it actually did. So, you know, a lot of attention to detail was put into promo copies because keep in mind, those were listened to on the radio. One record could have been responsible for hundreds of thousands of people of hearing that for the first time. So a lot of care went into those, you know, promo copy records, and it kind of shows there. So now we're going to get into some European pressings. Typically, this is the French on pink vinyl. Typically, color vinyl is noisy. What's bizarre with this album, which is so quiet, this was one of the more quiet pressings I've had, you know, I listened to. Little noisy still, but nothing like the US copies. Nowhere near. I mean, this was okay sounding. I mean, again, focused really heavy on the mid-range. There's not the best, you know, this particular, and most of the copies I've showed you, barring, you know, that Japanese copy, this is focused on the middle. They're all focused on the middle. You really don't have much in the way of low end. You don't have really much in the way of upper end. You know, quite a few times I walked over to the subwoofers, put my hand on them. They're not even moving. There just isn't a lot of low end frequency information on these records. And that's kind of something that was hard to grapple with listening to this. It's like I kind of put record on after record and after, you know, record. I'm like, man, I just really don't like the way any of these sounds. None of these are that great. And the reason I haven't really listened to any of these is because of my best choice. I've known it was the best copy of this record for a long time, and it's been exclusively for, you know, what I've listened to for 15, 20 years. So of what I've showed you so far, this French copy is pretty good. They did it as well in a pink-only cover. Mastering is the same on the record inside, but I figured I'd show it to you. This is a German copy. This blew my mind. Out of everything I listened to, including the current digital press record, this had the absolute most stone quiet vinyl, and it just blew me away. This German copy, the quality of vinyl, you know, it's a hot pink. I'm not sure why, but the quality sound-wise on this, it's fantastic. So this has a little bit more bass than the US pressings. Not really much. It's a very similar sounding record, but I will say as a whole, if it was going to be this or any other version of this record, just because of the sheer quality of sound on this. Now, I don't know if I have a good copy of this or what, but A lot of German pressings are notorious for being quality, like a lot of Japanese pressings, but with more traditional mastering choices. So I want to suspect that this is actually pretty normal for this record. I would go out on a limb and say that the German pressing of this is going to be quite a bit quieter than most other records, most other pressings of this record. I gotta say, going through this, it was just, this is a difficult record to review because, man, none of them are that great. Before I show you this other one, and I left it at the store, I was doing this review over the course of a couple weeks. I would actually say, as a whole, you really got two choices to listen, with this particular release. As a whole, maybe three choices. Let me rephrase that. The current Bernie Grundman mastering, and I left it at the store, just imagine I'm showing it to you. That was released in 2016. The current Bernie Grundman mastering is digital. It has more of the European mix, the more of the European sound. It has better upper end frequency, better lower end frequency than all these other copies I've showed you, and the vinyl is significantly quieter. If it was me and I was to be doing this all over again and buying this record for the first time, if I wasn't going to spend the money on the next two records I'm going to show you, I would just buy this one. This is a very unique recommendation for me because I am really loath to recommend digital records. But in this specific case, because so many of these other records just didn't cut it sound-wise, I really can go out and say, I feel comfortable telling you that the Bernie Grundman cut of this is a worthwhile record to own. And not all digital records sound crappy. It's just 99% of the time, a digital record doesn't sound as good as a lot of their analog counterparts. But in this case, the era that this was made in, the recording of it itself, whatever mastering choices they made, that kind of just makes this my recommendation for the third best sounding version of this record. The Bernie Grundman 2016 cut. It is in print now. The European version and the US version both use the same metalwork. And, either of those would be fine. All right, the second best sounding copy of this record would be a UK second or later pressing of this record. So the UK first pressing has a 2U, A2U in the dead wax and a B2U. So the very first lacquer on this record was a 2U. Anything later than that, so a 3U or later, I'm going to recommend as the second best pressing of this record to own. The reason being is this particular copy is so much better than anything I've ever heard of this record. These, in all honesty, are pretty crummy sounding records compared to a second or first pressing of this record. This is going to be a first pressing. A first pressing, which is the 2U, is by far and away the best sounding version of this record I've ever heard. And it's so much better than any other version I've ever heard. I'm really recommending you guys just go out and plunk down the money and buy this. If you can't find a nice clean 2U copy, get a 3U or later. It's still going to be significantly better than any other version of this record I've heard. For one, this record actually has bass. I really truly feel like they turned the bass off on pretty much every other version of this record. The Bernie Grundman digital cut tried to compensate for that a little bit. The mix is more resembling this, but this is all analog. There's nothing that just even comes close to this record. I truly feel this is the least inspiring of all the reviews I've ever done because I really don't have a path to put you guys on other than just plunk down the money and buy a UK pressing. It is just so much better. I've listened to this for so long. Maybe it's my ear is so in tune with this, but every one of these records, it just sounds like somebody cut the bass off at 100 hertz and just did away with it. This is the only record really to own, guys. A 2U copy. That is the true first UK pressing, lacquer-wise. And that's really the one to own, hands down. So, number one, 2U UK pressing. Number two would be a slightly later, like a 3U, 4U pressing, UK pressing. And then number three is going to be that Bernie Grundman 2016 digital pressing. Weird that that even cracked the top 3, but in a field of mostly crummy, anemic records, I mean, that's just where it is. You know, if I could take some of that upper end from the UK pressing, put it into this UK pressing, maybe tame down the, you know, the Japanese, put it into this, you'd have probably the equivalent of a modern day, you know, Mobile Fidelity Analog Productions, an audiophile version of this record. I feel like that's really the only thing that's missing from the, you know, UK pressing is kind of that upper end clarity that you get with a modern audiophile record. It's there on the Japanese record, but it's just so distracting from everything else. It's just too there. So yeah, again, in a perfect world, those would be kind of the combinations of the two. Also, I've never found, this is another, you know, I've talked about this earlier in the video, I've never found a quiet UK copy that had a quiet intro to Sheep as well. You just learn to deal with it. You learn to deal with it on all these records. You know, a nice compensation for that is the Bernie Grundman pressing, but not the Japanese pressing, just because the Japanese pressing is so wonky in the upper end, it's just not worth listening to. But yeah, I mean, as a whole, I'm so very unimpressed with most everything I listened to today. You know, I pretty much couldn't wait to get most of them off the turntable. The German one was utterly shocking because of how quiet the vinyl was. But this is one that normally in a review I don't do this, but the UK copies were really the ones that I wanted to listen to. You know, when I put them down, I started listening. I didn't take them off. I listened to the entire thing. It wasn't one of those deals where I listen, you know, needle dropped, and I'm like, oh, this is awful, get it off the turntable. I mean, that was the case for so many of these, although I slugged it out. But this was very inviting. This 2U copy really made you just want to enjoy the record and stop thinking about the sound quality, which I know was the purpose of this video. But all right, guys, that's it. Check us out online, www.theingroove.com. Until next time.